Okay, let's take a look at the media. Print media has been around since about 1690. In the early days in the United States, the press was considered to be partisan. You simply got which newspaper went along with your political viewpoint. As newspapers became easier and cheaper to read, you had the press evolved and became more along the lines of journalism. Although in the late 1800s, in the example of the New York Journal and New York World, you had yellow journalism, whereby newspapers tried to influence political events. 1920s gave rise to muckraking, in other words, where journalists and newspapers went out purposely to try to find the muck, to try to find the negative points about government and politics. Today, the press really does try to be more objective. Broadcast media, radio news evolved in the early 1900s as radio took over. Today, talk radio is a primary source of political commentary, not necessarily news events. Television has become a major news source in the 1960s, and still television is a major news source today. But what we're moving away from is not network news, but to cable news, whereby cable news can narrow in on subjects. And of course, you have growth of comedy news programs like Jon Stewart and Colbert. Newspapers and televisions use the websites. They get out on the internet, they find their information. It also provides access to international news and other countries' news. The question is whether or not the internet is good for politics. Does it You have so much information that you can't narrow down your choices on what government should do. Current media trends include the influence of networks, affiliates, and wire services to get the information out, increasing media consolidation under one roof, under one network, greater reliance on experts and pundits, or at least what we consider to be experts and pundits who are giving us their news. Cable channels go for narrowcasting, the 15-second sound bites, and trying to look at their demographic, who they think is watching them, and thereby giving their idea of the news. The blogs are out there. Some of us get on the blogs, and that's how we get some of our news. The blogospots, and the growth in the number of citizen journalists. You can get out there, create your own blog, you can become a journalist. Rules that govern the media include standards and norms of journalistic profession. And trying to be professionals, there are standards that they go by. The 1996 Telecommunications Act created the Federal Communications Corporation, which tried to regulate broadcast media and make it more available so it wasn't monopolized. One example being the equal time rule. If broadcast media gives equal time to, say, a Democratic candidate, they have to give equal time to a Republican candidate, and vice versa. Prior restraint, the government cannot restrain news before it gets published. Officials oftentimes issue press releases, getting out, that's the means by which to get it out to the wire services. They hold briefings and conferences, although particularly presidents in the last 10 years, they don't have as many conferences anymore. They speak to reporters on background or deep background, leaking information to throw it against the wall and see if it sticks kind of routine. They may also get their information off the record. New York Times versus Sullivan was an important case back in 1964, which said that news journalists and newspaper organizations and print media and television broadcasting, that they could basically report anything they wish to about a politician, but very difficult to show actual malice. Unless they could show that somebody actually knew that a report was untrue and printed it anyway, there's no way to prove libel. How do you cover the government? The president has his bully pulpit. He has the lectern. by which to get information out that he or she wants to get out to the people. They call a news conference, it's going to be published. They go through their press secretary for press conferences. Coverage of the president is generally unfavorable. The print media and television media and internet media always find something wrong with the president's address. They can't go out and find all 535 members of Congress for their little sound bites. Generally, Congress, the news media treats them more negatively than they even do the president. And Supreme Court meets in private, so coverage is impossible in their case. Press has little effect on long-term beliefs, though that political socialization is deeply rooted. Maybe short-term changes in opinion, maybe media can sway the uncommitteds and raise new issues, but more often than not, they also play agenda setting and framing the roles of different leaders. Of course, the media is biased. These people are human. They're human journalists. They can't possibly not show their bias as a liberal or a conservative. Looking at good stories over the issues, the public can look between the lines if they wish to. They can find the real information. Although, of course, it's possible to be charmed by interesting personalities. Our confidence in media is on a downturn. Republicans are often more critical than Democrats. Both parties use different sources. That ideological fragmentation is a concern. In other words, both sides of a political spectrum are getting more conservative, more liberal, and we tend to choose the news that supports our opinion. Notice where Americans get their news. Television's going down, internet's going up. I would not want to be a publisher of a magazine nowadays. Notice the number of presidential press conferences over the year. There have been less and less press conferences as you look at the last 10, 20 years. They don't like to get their information out through the press conference. News generation gap, quickly look at. You notice that the 18 to 29-year-olds don't get their news from nightly network news, get more news from The Daily Show and Stephen Colbert, where the 65 and plus are still watching the network news.